going to start by explaining what I believe Dean and Parker's position on abortion is, as well as the problems I think their position has. After that, I want to discuss 5 arguments or topics related to abortion that one or both of them have commented on. And finally, I'm going to discuss 2 points about the debate around abortion that are worthy of consideration. Let's start with their position and the problems it has. I believe Dean and Parker's definition of a person would be any living human organism with a conjunct of past or present and future subjective experiences. Here are some clips that clearly support this interpretation of their view.
First of all, I'll just tell you why I'm pro-choice. So I'm pro-choice because I only value life forms that would fall into a specific conjunction of traits. I value any life form that has a conjunction between past or present and future subjective experiences, and it's not until about 20 through 24 weeks that is true of a fetus. Therefore, prior to that point, I'm not going to associate value with the life of that fetus.
Okay, so like sapience plus sentience is what you're going to value.
Yeah, human plus sentience. So human plus past or present and future subjective experience.
Yeah, so I hold a conjunct to distribute moral value sufficient to grant the right to life. I hold the same conjunct as Parker, and that would be a conjunct between past or present and future subjective experiences.
I think their position can be restated more simply by defining a person as any human being that has both potential for consciousness in the future and has either had consciousness in the past or has consciousness now. And for those who are inevitably going to comment saying that I don't know what a conjunct is, here's the definition of conjunct according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary: something joined or associated with another. If you use the definition of conjunct with their definition of a person, as they have described it in their own words, you will essentially arrive at their position as I restated it. The central point of contention between their position and the pro-life view is essentially the question of what a person is. In the pro-life view, a person is a living human being. Our view of personhood is not based on what human beings can do, but on what we are, human beings. In contrast, Dean and Parker's definition of a person shows that they value humans based on what they can do, deploy consciousness in the future, and at some point in the past or present. If humans are valued for what they can do, then why would the definition of person exclude non-human animals who can do the same thing? For example, adult pigs are far more conscious than healthy newborn human beings, and they satisfy all of Dean and Parker's definition of a person with the exception of the human part. So on what grounds could pigs and other non-human animals possibly be denied personhood? It's especially important to note that Dean and Parker do not appeal to the higher levels of consciousness that healthy adult humans have compared to pigs. And frankly, I'm thankful for that, since if they did, then their position, if consistent, would deny personhood to some seriously injured born humans who may never become more conscious than some non-human animals. Furthermore, if the argument is based on humans' natural potential for greater consciousness than that of non-human animals, then human zygotes must also be considered persons. This is because, like newborns, they possess this natural capacity, even though they do not currently have the immediate capacity. Relevant to this point is a clip where Dean expounds on his position, so I'm going to play it now.
So you're saying that the argument is that you think that it's wrong prima facie to unalive human beings, but that's only in virtue of when they satisfy both members of the conjunct.
No, I wouldn't say that's only in virtue of when they satisfy the members of the conjunct. However, when they don't, this would be like compelling reason. However, okay, there's like two conditions in which I think create the compelling reason. It's that they don't satisfy the conjunct, and there's like a violation of like the woman's right to bodily autonomy.
The important part of this clip is where Dean suggests that his definition of personhood may be relevant only when concerns about bodily autonomy arise. However, if that is really his position, then he would have to oppose the intentional destruction of human embryos conceived in vitro, something that I highly doubt he actually opposes, and something which Parker clearly doesn't.
I wouldn't care about killing a zygote. You can kill a trillion zygotes and I wouldn't give a shit. If I slap a zygote under your view, I should go to prison, right?
Also, if human embryos are not persons, then what would be the issue with destroying them? If you saw Destiny's debate with Lila Rose, you'll recall that he made a somewhat similar argument when discussing a living born human who he believes never has had or will have consciousness. Lila pointed out that he would not consider such a born human to be a person. And so according to Destiny's view of personhood, there shouldn't be anything ethically wrong with killing the child. Destiny's response to this line of questioning was quite puzzling.
Do you think that because baby Jax is missing most of his brain and doesn't have consciousness, in your view, he should not have a right to live?
A right now, if the parents want to have that child and have that experience.
Does he have a right? If the parents wanted to execute him, do they have the right to do that?
Yeah, I think they could have terminated that pregnancy at any point in time, yes.
But as a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old? Does baby Jax have the right to live, or can he be executed?
I think you can make the argument that if already committed to having it, they can't change their mind at that point.
Why?
But
Why? He doesn't have consciousness. That's
because
your
I think
whole
in
definition
terms
for
of,
human value.
are you asking me the moral answer or the legal answer?
The legal answer.
The legal answer is if I don't think you can create a world where you're giving birth to some children and then changing your mind a year or two later.
But Destiny, your legal position hinges on consciousness as the standard for human value under the law. Baby Jax, according to your own statement, does not have human consciousness. Why would it be wrong to take his life at 2 or 3 years old?
So my legal position maximizes the right of a woman to do what she will with her body, because the most important part of my legal position is I'm trying to counterbalance the potential mishap of killing a human that might be a mind or a person before 20 weeks, whenever I decide, whatever the science says on that. And I'm trying to balance that against the mother's right to have an autonomy to her body. The right to her body cannot be invaded.
As you mentioned yourself, it is a big responsibility to take care of a child with disabilities at 2 or 3.
Sure, but completely different than having to give your body to it, and that balance is gone once the child is born.
Let's say baby Jax at, let's say 6 months old. Baby Jax at 6 months old was completely 100% dependent on the bodies of his parents.
He was not,
including the breasts of his mother if he was breastfeeding.
No, he was not.
Yes, he was.
He wasn't living inside the body of any of them.
Did baby Jax feed himself?
No, but he can be fed. He doesn't have to. Who
feeds baby Jax? Is it a robot?
It could be the dad. It could be the mom. It could be a sibling.
And are they using their body to feed baby Jax?
I mean, in that case, we're using our body for everything.
Yes.
But that's become so reductively absurd that it doesn't really make sense anymore.
It's not reductively absurd. This is why parents can go to jail for parental neglect if they don't use their bodies to care for their children.
No, this is why when you put a person in jail, you can imprison a person, you can deprive them of all sorts of rights, but you can't take parts of their body in order to make another person whole. There's
I don't think it follows that means just abortion's just.
There is no other part you can conceive of past conception where we're taking people's bodies and using them for things.
If such a born human is not in fact a person according to Destiny's definition, then what would be wrong with intentionally killing him? Saying that there is no longer any infringement on the woman's bodily autonomy is in no way a sufficient response for a couple of reasons. Number one, I suspect that Destiny is fine with the intentional destruction of human embryos in vitro, where there is no infringement on a woman's bodily autonomy. And number two, Destiny doesn't consider it wrong to kill non-sentient forms of life, like grass. So from within his moral framework, why would it be wrong to intentionally kill a born child who has never and will never deploy consciousness? It's worth noting that treating conscious non-human animals as persons would entail an unimaginable reshaping of society. Would conscious animals be granted citizenship under the 14th Amendment, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside? Would they be eligible for programs such as the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, otherwise known as WIC, which provides nutritional assistance to low-income pregnant women, new mothers, infants, and young children to ensure they receive adequate nutrition during critical stages of development? Would pig farmers be convicted of mass murder if they killed their swine for food? I want to take a quick break from this video to let you know that one of the best ways you can support my channel is by shopping my merch, which includes hoodies, tank tops, t-shirts, and more. You can find them on shop.haydenrhodea.com, which should be linked in the description. With that said, back to the video. Having clearly stated and supported with evidence what I believe Dean and Parker's position on personhood and abortion is, I want to move on to some of the arguments that I've seen them bring up in previous videos and media appearances, starting with the now infamous question of whether women who use IUDs are murderers.
Because you're saying that it is murder to kill a human being right at any point in development, especially when it's in the mother's womb. My question to you would be, well, does this make women with IUDs murderers? Because it is the case that in some scenarios, an IUD will allow for conception to occur, meaning there's a unique human life there, but it will prevent its implantation, intentionally killing it. But on your position, you said that a human being is morally valuable at the moment of conception.
Agreed.
I would love to ask you a question. Do you think that women with IUDs are murderers?
So a woman with an IUD, you think she's a murderer? So if a human zygote is just as valuable as a fetus, is as valuable as you or me, well, if I were to pull out a 9mm and kill you right now, I'd go to jail for 25 to life. Let me ask you a question. Women with IUDs, it's a form of birth control that sometimes kills those zygotes, the same way I'd kill you. If I should get 25 to life for killing you, should a woman with an IUD get 25 to life?
Well, here's the thing, right?
There are a couple of distinctions that need to be made before it's possible to accurately address Dean's question. First, it's important to note that someone could be morally considered a murderer while not legally being one. For example, I would consider a woman who intentionally kills her preborn child by taking mifepristone and misoprostol to have committed murder according to the biblical definition of the word, which I would argue is the unjustified intentional taking of innocent human life. However, assuming that the abortion was committed legally, she would not be considered a murderer under U.S. and state law. Second, there's a difference between murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, criminal negligence as a form of homicide, and reckless endangerment that does not result in death or injury. I asked ChatGPT to create a table showing some of the similarities and differences, and here's what it came up with. Now, let's see how a typical use of an IUD stacks up against the legal definition of murder and the biblical definition. For this analysis, we will assume that an equal protection bill has been enacted. This means that for the rest of this section, we'll assume that the law is going to treat unborn children as legal persons. Dean suggests that about 50% of the time an IUD will prevent conception, and the other 50% of the time it will prevent implantation.
Like a very small percentage of these cases. So that's why I keep relating it to the car.
It's about 50-50.
Okay, well then if it's 50-50, great, change my opinion. Let's get rid of IUDs.
Okay. So are women with IUDs murderers?
However, this is not even remotely close to the real ratio. The systematic review of the mechanism of action of IUDs found that in 4.5% of cycles, there was evidence of fertilization followed by a failure to implant. Most at-home pregnancy tests will not detect a pregnancy until implantation occurs. So even in the rare case that fertilization did occur and implantation was inhibited by the IUD, it would essentially be impossible to prove that there was a death in a court of law. I also question what percentage of women are even aware that a post-fertilization mechanism of action exists for their IUD. So it's entirely possible that some or even most women might not intend to inhibit implantation and may not even be aware of that risk. A woman who has no knowledge that implantation may be inhibited and who has no idea if any deaths took place as a consequence of the IUD would only be guilty of reckless endangerment as far as both she and the courts can be aware. In contrast, a woman who knew that her IUD may inhibit implantation and who has no idea if any deaths took place as a consequence of the IUD would only be guilty of a maximum charge of attempted murder as far as both she and the courts would be able to tell, since they cannot prove if there was a victim, but may be able to prove intent and awareness of risk through something like a text exchange. This case would be similar to one where a hunter intentionally shoots into a cabin, which is sometimes inhabited by a world-traveling orphan with no relationships. The hunter knows the cabin might be occupied and says on a trail cam that he knows there is a 5% chance that the traveler is in there, but that if he is, he wants him dead anyway and understands the risk that his actions pose to human life. Suppose after 2 shots at the cabin, a flood quickly washes it all away. Any potential victims and evidence of victims are gone before investigators can arrive. All that is left is the trail cam footage. In such a case, an attempted murder charge could still be made since there was intent to kill and an awareness of the risk. So from a biblical perspective, the answer to whether a woman who uses an IUD is a murderer truly is that it depends, and that in almost all cases, she will never know, since even if she had intent, she's unlikely to know if a death occurred. Similarly, a woman who was unaware of the risk and did not have intent is unlikely to know whether she is guilty of criminal negligence as a form of homicide or of reckless endangerment resulting in no injury and no death. Now, from a real-world practical perspective, this is all about to get even more complicated. The vast majority of pro-lifers don't want retroactive punishments for those involved in abortion. So we need to consider what IUD use would be like in the wake of an equal protection bill actually passing, something that is yet to happen. If preborn humans were legally considered persons in a given state, it would be unlikely that IUDs would continue to be sold in that state for the sole purpose of contraception. IUDs may still be sold for other medical purposes, however, users would likely need to affirm that they are not having sex. While this may seem extreme or unusual to some, it's actually comparable to existing protocols for drugs like isotretinoin, formerly known as Accutane. To get a prescription for isotretinoin, patients have to join the iPledge program. This program has strict rules to make sure patients do not get pregnant while taking the drugs, because it can seriously harm a baby's development or cause birth defects. For instance, patients must attest that they will not become pregnant while taking the medication, use 2 forms of birth control, and undergo regular pregnancy testing. Similarly, if laws treated preborn humans as legal persons, access to IUDs for contraception could be restricted or subject to stringent requirements, with users possibly needing to affirm abstinence from sex while using the device. This approach, while restrictive, would mirror safeguards already accepted for other high-risk medications. Keep in mind that fundamental legal protections, such as the right to privacy, protections against unlawful search and seizure, and burden of proof, would still apply as they do with any other law. So the actual number of women who would get caught using an IUD after an equal protection bill passed would probably be little to none. Unless a woman drove herself to a police station and willingly confessed to using an IUD while engaging in intercourse, it would be highly unlikely that she would ever get caught, investigated, or convicted. And the fact that equal protection bills won't stop every instance of abortion or reckless endangerment of unborn human beings isn't a good argument against passing them. Laws against child abuse don't stop every instance of child abuse, but that doesn't mean that child abuse should be legal, or that supporters of such laws must also support installing government-monitored cameras in every room of family homes. Just like I can deplore child abuse while maintaining my opposition to government surveillance inside family homes, I can deplore abortion and the reckless endangerment of the unborn without supporting a totalitarian surveillance state that would violate rights to privacy. On to the next argument. Should there be retroactive punishments for women who get abortions? Here's a clip of Parker arguing this with Charlie Kirk for context.
So, like, pedophiles, people who were married to children in the past and normalized in that society, should they go to prison?
Should pedophiles?
Like, if you could go back in time, would you put those pedophiles in prison that married those children because it was normalized? They were deceived into thinking it's okay. Would you put them in prison?
You got to slow down.
Sorry.
Pedophiles should get the death penalty.
No, so you'd go back in the past, you'd give them the death penalty, even though they were deceived into thinking it was okay. But you said people who get abortions who are women shouldn't go to prison.
But it's not currently illegal.
Okay, regardless.
Pedophilia
at that time, it wasn't.
No, I would not go back and retroactively enforce laws where things were currently not illegal.
You wouldn't put pedophiles in prison in the past.
Even if someone believes it would be morally justified to investigate or prosecute women for obtaining abortions during a time when the procedure was legal, the U.S. legal system does not allow for such retroactive enforcement. This is because of the constitutional prohibition on ex post facto laws. An ex post facto law is one that attempts to criminalize actions after the fact, making conduct illegal after it has already occurred and punishing people for it. Both Article 1, Section 9 and Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution expressly forbid this kind of retroactive criminal legislation. Even if the law changes and abortion becomes illegal in a particular state or at the federal level, individuals who obtained abortions while it was legal cannot be prosecuted for those past actions. Retroactive prosecutions would require a constitutional amendment explicitly repealing the ex post facto clause or providing a carve-out for past abortions specifically. Even those who think it would be moral to have retroactive prosecutions probably recognize that it would be a horrible trade-off if it meant eliminating the ex post facto clause or normalizing the addition of amendments that add exceptions to it. A fair objection to my position would be to question whether or not I would support something like the Nuremberg trials, where some Nazi leaders were prosecuted for crimes against humanity, among other charges. And while I haven't done much research at all into the Nuremberg trials, my initial inclination is to support them. However, I think a key difference is that conducting the Nuremberg trials did not require eliminating constitutional protection against ex post facto laws within a country or normalizing the granting of exceptions to them. This is because the trials were not conducted by the German government, but by a collection of foreign governments. The Nuremberg trials also occurred shortly after the crimes were committed, whereas retroactive prosecutions for those involved in abortion would date back to more than 50 years ago in some cases, meaning that evidence which could exonerate some of the accused may have been lost over time. I also fear that retroactive prosecutions would lead to more economic, political, and social inaction in society as a whole, since people would fear that legal action sanctioned by their own government today may result in their prosecution by that same government tomorrow. Such negative effects dramatically outweigh any potential benefits of retroactive prosecutions for abortions. In contrast, the Nuremberg trials did not entail many of these risks, as they were conducted by foreign countries and held shortly after the crimes occurred. Even if I am somehow inconsistent for supporting the Nuremberg trials, but not retroactive prosecutions for those involved in abortion, that doesn't mean that abortion itself is moral or should remain legal. It would just mean that I'm inconsistent in my position on retroactive prosecutions for certain crimes. The next argument that I want to discuss deals with Dean's confusion about the differences between someone in a permanent vegetative state and someone who is brain dead. Here's the clip I'm referencing for context.
Ask yourself if you value clinically brain dead people. They are human, they are alive, they don't have consciousness, and we typically don't consider it murder to pull the plug on them. The only difference between you and a brain dead person is that you have consciousness, they don't have consciousness, and they never will again.
Someone who is brain dead is legally, clinically, and biologically dead. Furthermore, they are dead not because they will never be conscious in the future, but because they have lost organic unity. That is, there has been an irreversible breakdown of the whole organism's integrated functioning. Contrasted with just parts of the body failing, death means the entire self-regulating system collapses, even if some cells or organs still function temporarily. In essence, to move from life to death is to shift from a coordinated whole to scattered parts. It's also not as if organic unity doesn't emerge until there's brain activity, since clearly if organic unity were not present from fertilization, a human zygote could never develop to the point of having a brain. So while it is true that there comes a point in human development where the brain becomes the integrating organ of the body, it is not true that the human zygote is not a living human organism prior to developing a brain. And even Dean would acknowledge that a human zygote is biologically alive. Using brain death as the marker for the death of humans with a brain makes sense, because for humans beyond a certain developmental stage, brain death truly is their point of death, since it's the point when organic unity is lost. Instead of brain dead patients, I imagine that Dean was thinking of people in permanent vegetative states, some of whom it may be extremely unlikely to ever become conscious again. Please bear in mind, however, that there are significant variations in the prognosis for people in vegetative states. For example, some people are in a persistent vegetative state and are more likely to recover compared to those classified as being in a permanent vegetative state. I mention this because it's important not to paint with an overly broad brush when discussing these cases, which can vary significantly. Dean's main point seems to be that if it's considered morally licit to stop providing disproportionate medical care to a patient in a permanent vegetative state, resulting in their predictable death, that somehow suggests that what really matters to us morally is consciousness itself. However, the reason that many pro-lifers would consider it morally licit to withdraw disproportionate care from a patient in a permanent vegetative state is not that they actually value consciousness, but because disproportionate care is just that, disproportionate. And this is not some arbitrary standard that I'm trying to draw. While I'm not Catholic, I do think the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops provides a useful explanation of disproportionate care in Directive 57 of the Ethical and Religious Directive for Catholic Healthcare Services. They write, quote, "A person may forego extraordinary or disproportionate means of preserving life. Disproportionate means are those that in the patient's judgment do not offer a reasonable hope of benefit or entail an excessive burden or impose excessive expense on the family or the community," end quote. For those watching who are Catholic, don't take my words in this video as what the church teaches, because I'm not Catholic and it's possible my position on what is and is not disproportionate care may differ from Catholic teaching. When the withdrawal of disproportionate care results in the foreseeable death of someone, what killed them was the underlying condition, not the people who decided to withdraw the disproportionate care. In contrast, if someone were to shoot someone in a permanent vegetative state resulting in their death, that would be murder. And I would be curious to know if Dean would support murder charges for someone who shoots and kills patients in a permanent vegetative state. If he does, that would show that he still considers them to be persons. In short, while withdrawing disproportionate care may result in the foreseeable death of someone, that is clearly different from intentionally killing them. In contrast, pregnancy is both proportionate and ordinary. In fact, it's so ordinary that every human being is the product of it. The next clip I want to talk about is this one from Jubilee.
So I want to go on to abortion, because abortion was talked about a lot when it comes to family values.
Yeah.
I really don't think if a party is pushing for adoption to raise a child versus murder, that's not shying away from family values. That's not against family values. Because if that was really true, how come in pretty much every single state to date, if somebody is to term or carrying a child and they get murdered, is a double murder? It's not a single murder, it's a double murder.
Sure.
So if the judicial system looks at it that way, shouldn't abortion be looked at the same way? Or is it based on the person decide, oh yeah, I could kill somebody or not?
Yeah, I can explain that to you. So first of all, I would like to tell you why I'm pro-choice. That's because I don't value, right, a unicellular life form that doesn't have the ability to display like first-person subjective experiences. Right? I don't value the fetus until it has that ability. That comes at about 20 through 24 weeks. But now that we got that out of the way, you do ask a great question, right? How can I say that abortion isn't murder, then turn around and support legislation that would allow someone that kills a mother that is pregnant to be charged with double homicide? Well, I could tell you through an analogy. Let's say you have a car. What kind of car do you drive?
I drive a Malibu.
You drive a Malibu, okay. So if you go up to your Malibu, after we're done debating here and you break the windshield, did you do anything wrong? No, it's your car. It's your property. You can make that decision.
It depends on what view you look at it.
Let's think about it this way. If you go up to your car and you consent to breaking your car's windshield, you didn't do anything wrong there. You have a right to do that. But if someone else just walking down the street goes up and breaks your car's windshield without your consent, did they do something wrong?
If you okay, for example, let's say this. If I go out on the street right now.
Wait, do you mind just answering my question so I can explain this analogy to you?
Go ahead.
So if someone else walking up this street breaks your car's windshield without your consent, did they do something wrong?
I agree, yeah.
And that's the same way I think about the right to an abortion. I would define murder as the unjustified termination of a human being's life. And I'd say it is justified when the mother would do it, as she would have the right to, as a fetus is presiding within your uterus. But if some non-consenting third party walks up and unalives her and the fetus within her room without her consent, that is unjustified.
Dean says that he would support someone who kills a pregnant mother being charged for a double homicide, which makes no sense in his position. If the unborn are not persons prior to consciousness, then there can be no second homicide charge for the unborn child. There's no getting around this. He can't say that the personhood of the unborn depends on his or her relation to the killer. To me, what this really shows is that Dean actually just supports special murder rights for mothers up to a certain point. And his arguments surrounding personhood are a veiled attempt to justify what otherwise is an obviously illogical position. And for those pro-choicers who might be quick to change their position and argue for a single homicide charge instead of two, I want you to answer this following hypothetical honestly. Imagine your sister is 10 weeks pregnant with a baby girl, whom she has already named Sarah. Wanting to prepare for her arrival, your sister moves from a small studio apartment to a larger townhome. She buys personalized baby clothes with Sarah's name embroidered on them, decorates a nursery with wallpaper, assembles a crib, and arranges the room with the care and excitement that we would expect from a loving mother. Her boyfriend, the child's father, has so far acted supportive, but recently he crushed up the abortion pills mifepristone and misoprostol and secretly put them in your sister's pancakes. She unknowingly ingests them, and her unborn daughter dies as a consequence. He later confesses to what he has done, and she wants him to be charged with murder. Would you support those charges? And if you would, doesn't that show that all these arguments around personhood are just a veil covering your real position, which is that mothers should have special rights to kill their preborn child until a certain point in their development? Dean's response to the double homicide question makes no sense, since it treats the unborn as property if the mother is the one willing the killing, but as a person if she's not the one willing the killing. If Dean wants to switch his argument to being one based on bodily autonomy, he's welcome to do so, but that position argues for abortion up to birth and has other issues. Since for now that isn't his position, I'm going to hold off on rebutting bodily autonomy arguments for the sake of focusing on the arguments that he and/or Parker have made. Now for the all-important question of who to save, 1 human baby or 10 human zygotes.
On another hand, when you tell me that you value any and all human lives, ask yourself if you value a unicellular human organism. Would you rather save 1 human baby or 10 human zygotes?
There are so many problems with this question that I'm going to first list them and then explain them more thoroughly. Number 1, this question more closely relates to IVF than abortion. Number 2, choosing to save some people over others does not imply that it should be legal to kill those who are not chosen. Number 3, the use of a newborn in the hypothetical may implicitly support the pro-life view. Number 4, moral intuitions can be wrong, especially in cultures where prejudice against certain human beings is rampant. Starting with the first point, Dean's question more closely relates to IVF than abortion, since in the case of abortion, the child is already being gestated in the mother's body. Risks like death during the thawing process would not be present for a child already being gestated, but would be present for frozen human embryos. Rephrasing the hypothetical to one more analogous to the abortion conversation would look like the following. Which would you rather save? 99 pregnant women or 100 non-pregnant women? In this case, I imagine even most pro-choicers wouldn't consider it unreasonable for someone to save the 99 pregnant women. Also, suppose you had a choice between saving a healthy, dearly loved family member or 2 terminally ill 99-year-olds, each with only a week left to live. A lot of people might choose to save their family member, but that wouldn't mean that they don't consider the terminally ill to be persons or that they think it should be legal to murder them. The use of a newborn in the hypothetical is particularly interesting. On the one hand, using newborns in hypotheticals surrounding abortion is often useful, since newborns are closer to the unborn in many aspects than an adult human being is. However, it's worth noting that we extend great care to newborns, particularly because they are weak, dependent, and defenseless. For example, if first responders to a hurricane saw a woman and her newborn on top of a car on a flooded street, they would likely prioritize getting the newborn to safety, since he or she is more dependent on the care of others. If this logic were applied consistently, our culture wouldn't dehumanize the unborn based upon their high levels of dependency and neediness, but would instead extend great care to them, much like we do with newborn human infants. Our moral intuitions can also be wrong. For example, in the early 1800s, if you asked some white Americans in the South whether they would rather save 1 white American over 2 black Americans, it's quite possible that some or most of them would have said that they would save the 1 white American. Yet they would have been wrong, because morality isn't determined by a popular vote, and all human beings are created equal. Moving on, I want to briefly discuss the question of whether abortion should be left up to the states. I don't know what Dean and Parker's position on this is, but I think it's worth briefly discussing a few key principles. First, if it is wrong to leave murder up to the states, then to be consistent, Dean and Parker would need to support banning abortion after fetal consciousness from the federal level. However, if it's not wrong to leave abortion up to the states, then they can't think it's crazy for pro-lifers to make that political argument, as Ben Shapiro does in this clip.
All right, quick question, easy start. Do you think that abortion should be left up to the states?
I think that under a constitutional structure, abortion should be left up to the states.
Okay, phenomenal. And if, in your preferable worldview, if you were the dictator of America, would you leave it up to the states?
If I were a dictator and none of the constitutional systems applied, I'd have to think about it. The reason I'd have to think about it is because I do think that the sort of question of whether the United States could hold together under one dictatorial rule is a very serious one.
If the public thought it should be left up to the... Listen, okay, I'll just give you my point. You think that abortion...
Okay, why don't you do that?
Yeah, you think that abortion's murder, right?
Do I think that it's murder?
Yeah.
I do think that it is murder, although I don't think that all forms of murder are morally equivalent.
No, that's fine. So you think that abortion is murder, and you think that abortion should be left up to the state. So in other words, you think that murder should be left up to the state.
Personally, I recognize that it's not politically tenable for a Republican president to support a national equal protection bill, and I have no problem with a politician taking the political realities into account when determining what their political position on abortion will be, so long as they are trying to protect as many preborn lives as is politically possible. In my best judgment, Republican politicians leaving abortion up to the states seems reasonable given the current political realities. If the political circumstances change, such as if the populace became dramatically more pro-life, then I would support national legislation that further restricts abortion. I would also support the Supreme Court interpreting the 14th Amendment as requiring equal protection of the unborn under the law, since I believe that at the time of the 14th Amendment's passage, the term person would have included all living human beings. For example, the 1828 Webster's Dictionary defines person as, quote, an individual human being consisting of body and soul. We apply the word to living beings only, possessed of a rational nature. The body when dead is not called a person. It is applied alike to a man, woman, or child, end quote. For reference, the 14th Amendment states, quote, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws, end quote. Please note that I'm not calling for violence, revolution, or anything like that by pointing this out. I have repeatedly condemned all abortion-related violence and political violence. Shifting gears, I want to close with one final thing that I believe people with Dean and Parker's position on abortion and personhood should consider. According to the 2022 Abortion Surveillance Report from the U.S. CDC, about 1.1% of abortions in 2022 were performed at 21 weeks or later. Abortion was defined for the purpose of their surveillance report as follows. An intervention performed within the limits of state and jurisdiction law by a licensed clinician, examples being a physician, nurse-midwife, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant, intended to terminate a suspected or known intrauterine pregnancy, and that does not result in a live birth. This definition excludes management of intrauterine fetal death, early pregnancy failure or loss, ectopic pregnancy, or retained products of conception. All abortions in this report are considered to be legally induced unless stated otherwise, end quote. Since some states do not report their data to the CDC, it makes sense to take the 1.1% of abortions that they report occur at 21 weeks or later and multiply it by the roughly 1 million abortions that took place in 2024 as estimated by the Guttmacher Institute. When this is done, I estimate that there were roughly 11,000 abortions last year that intentionally took the life of unborn humans that Dean and Parker would presumably consider to be persons. Keep in mind that according to the FBI, the number of females who committed homicide in 2024 was 2,059. So if Dean and Parker did support charging these women with murder, the number of females imprisoned for homicide would increase about 5-fold, assuming that there wasn't a significant reduction in the number of women getting late-term abortions were it to be criminalized. It's also not as though these abortions are to save the life of the mother, since at 21 weeks or later, there are no instances that I am aware of where it would be necessary to kill an unborn child in utero and deliver them dead rather than simply delivering them alive, with the possible unfortunate consequence that they may die shortly following delivery. The earliest known case of a prematurely delivered child surviving outside the womb occurred at exactly 21 weeks of gestation. For those doubting what I just mentioned, here's ChatGPT's response to the question you may be asking. The prompt I gave ChatGPT 5.2 was the following. To save the life of the mother, when, if ever, would it be necessary to kill the 21 weeks or later fetus in utero and deliver it dead rather than simply delivering it alive by C-section, with the unfortunate consequence being that it might die shortly after delivery due to being delivered prematurely? ? Here was the response. This is a serious and emotionally charged medical ethical question. I'll answer it clinically and factually, focusing on real obstetric practice rather than slogans. Short answer. In modern obstetrics, it is extremely rare, essentially vanishingly rare, that saving the mother's life requires intentionally killing a 21-week or later fetus in utero, rather than delivering it alive. In almost all life-threatening maternal situations at or beyond this gestational age, the fastest and safest option for the mother is to end the pregnancy by delivery, usually by emergency cesarean, with no medical need to cause fetal death beforehand. That said, there are a very small number of theoretical or exceptional scenarios worth explaining to understand why this question even arises. Core medical principle. When a pregnancy threatens the mother's life, the medical goal is to end the pregnancy as quickly and safely as possible for the mother. At 21 weeks or later, the uterus is large, vascular, and surgically accessible. Delivery, often by C-section, is usually faster, more controllable, and less dangerous for the mother than procedures intended to cause fetal death in utero. Situations where delivery, not fetal killing, is standard. In almost all real-world emergencies, the correct action is immediate delivery. Severe preeclampsia/eclampsia HELLP syndrome, placental abruption, chorioamnitis with maternal sepsis, uterine rupture, severe hemorrhage, maternal cardiac or respiratory failure, cancer or other conditions requiring urgent treatment. In these cases, delaying for feticide would increase maternal risk. Cesarean delivery is faster than inducing fetal demise. The fetus may live briefly or longer, but that is a secondary consequence, not the intent. Why intentional in utero fetal death is almost never necessary at 21 weeks or later. Number 1, feticide takes time. Inducing fetal death, examples being by potassium chloride injection, requires imaging, precision, several minutes to confirm demise. In a true maternal emergency, minutes matter. A C-section is faster. Number 2, cesarean delivery is safer for the mother. At this gestational age, the uterus must be opened anyway. Bleeding risk is similar or lower. An intact fetus does not increase maternal danger. There is no physiological advantage to the fetus being dead before delivery. Number 3, maternal survival does not depend on fetal death. What threatens the mother is the placenta, the pregnancy itself, the physiological burden. Ending the pregnancy, not killing the fetus, resolves the threat. The rare theoretical exceptions, mostly not real-world emergencies. These are sometimes cited in ethical or legal discussions, but are extraordinarily uncommon in practice. Number 1, non-viable fetus with lethal anomaly and induction. If the fetus has no chance of survival, example being anencephaly, the mother is stable, labor is induced rather than cesarean. Some clinicians historically used feticide to avoid signs of life at delivery. Simplify legal documentation. This is not medically necessary to save the mother's life and is largely about legal or emotional considerations, not physiology. I'm just going to read that part again. This is not medically necessary to save the mother's life and is largely about legal or emotional considerations, not physiology. Number 2, situations where cesarean itself poses extreme risk. Very rarely, severe uterine infection, coagulopathy, surgical impossibility. Even here, feticide does not improve maternal safety. Oh, look at that. Let me read that one more time. Even here, feticide does not improve maternal safety. It does not make delivery safer, only different. Number 3, historical or resource-limited context. Before modern surgery, anesthesia, blood transfusion, and neonatal care, destructive fetal procedures were sometimes used to save the mother. These are obsolete in modern high-income medical systems. Key ethical distinction. There is a crucial difference between intending to save the mother by delivering the fetus, knowing the fetus may die, versus intending the death of the fetus as a means to save the mother. Modern medicine almost always operates under the first, not the second. Bottom line, at 21 weeks or later, saving the mother's life virtually never requires intentionally killing the fetus in utero. Emergency delivery, usually by cesarean, is faster, safer, and standard. Claims that feticide is medically required in these situations are not supported by contemporary obstetric practice. If you want, I can walk through a specific medical scenario by step, explain how clinicians make these decisions in real time, discuss how laws sometimes complicate but do not change the medical reality. Since this video includes some clips from Jubilee, it's probably going to get copyright claimed on YouTube. So if you want to support me, please consider visiting my Buy Me a Coffee page, shopping my merch, or browsing my website, all of which should be linked in the description. Also, consider following me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, where reviews and ratings would also be appreciated.